welcome to the 20th INGED International ELT Conference. And we will have 2 days sessions, 2 days seminars. And here we have the president of INGED, Aydan Hocam, Professor Dr. Aydan Ersöz. Yes, Aydan Hocam, we can start however you like.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Distinguished speakers, INGED members, and my dear colleagues. It's a huge pleasure for me to welcome you all to the 20th International INGED ELT Conference on behalf of INGED Board. As INGED, we hope that this conference provides our colleagues with opportunities for professional development through an exchange of ideas, practices, and experiences in our field. As you all know, this year's theme has been set as engaging students, empowering teachers. We know that active learning and effective learning cannot take place without engaged students. And empowering teachers will definitely help to engage students more. Conferences such as this one will definitely help teachers, will help to empower teachers by providing them with a platform to improve themselves personally and professionally. This year, as you can see, our host is Bolu, Abant İzzet Baysal University. And our deepest appreciation goes to Associate Professor Dr. Sedat Akayoğlu and Associate Professor Dr. Anıl Söylemez. They have been, we are so grateful because they have been so generous and supportive. You can't believe, really. And without the invaluable efforts of the members of the organization committee, of course, we wouldn't be able to realize this conference. So thank you very much, Sedat Akayoğlu, Anıl Söylemez, Büşra Çelen, Nazlı Güngör, and Akın Güngör. We want to express our deepest thanks to the members of the Blind Screening Committee and the members of Science and Advisory Board who played a crucial role while evaluating the proposals. I also want to express my gratitude to Asena Karaduman, our content designer, for all the creative work she has done for our association and this conference. We are grateful to our plenary speakers, invited speakers, and concurrent session speakers, and our panelists for kindly accepting to share their invaluable knowledge, opinion, and experiences with us. Well, you know, there's a joke. People say that people who attend the conferences are the ones who need them the least. I don't know whether that's true or not, but I'm really so happy to have you here. I'm really thankful to you, all of the participants, because without you, there wouldn't be such an event. And I hope we will have a rewarding, enlightening, and stimulating conference. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Aydan Hocam. Thank you so much. And as the host institution, I will have a short talk about the opening session, and I will also give some more information about the registration for the concurrent sessions. And finally, I will show another platform for interaction. And first of all, as the ELT department of Bolu Abant Baysal University, we are pleased, but most importantly, we are honored to host the 20th INGED International ELT Conference at our own university. Actually, we wish we could organize this event in face-to-face format. So we could have a chat during the coffee breaks, we could have a lunch together, we could have a dinner. However, as the organizing committee, we thought that it would be much better and healthier to continue in online platforms for a while. So we tried to do our best to provide opportunities for interaction for for different possibilities on the internet platforms. And first of all, I would like to thank the INGED board members for accepting our proposal for hosting this event at our university. It was at Atılım University, as far as I remember. It was even before the pandemic, and we talked about this event, and they trusted us and gave this opportunity. And I hope you will enjoy throughout the conference and leave the event with great ideas. I can say this. And while organizing the event, there were some people who provided us great support. For example, Associate Professor Dr. Anıl Rakıcıoğlu Söylemez, whom we have been working together for the last 17 years. And we have always been working in collaboration. And I think we are doing a good job with limited opportunities. And actually, we can say that we are creating our own opportunities. And then I'd like to thank to Professor Dr. Aydan Ersöz, Dr. Suzan Önes, Associate Professor Dr. Nazlı Güngör, Dr. Büşra Çelen, Assistant Professor Dr. Ceyhun Karabıyık, Mustafa Akın Güngör, our research assistant Esra Metin, and Asena Karaduman. We all worked to make this event better for the, especially for the last days. But I'd like to thank Aydan Hocam specifically. She has always been a model for us in the field. She has never lost her motivation. Even during the pandemic, she organized Zoom events, learned how to use technology effectively, and she continued to contribute to the ELT field even after she retired. And with her personal efforts, she has been working hard for INGED. And I also witnessed how she has worked during the organization of this event. Thank you so much for being a good model for us. And now I'd like to give some technical information about the platforms we will use for this event. But for that, I have to share my screen. Just a second. Yes, now I think you can see my screen. Can you see my screen? Yes. And this is the web page of our event, our conference. Here you can find our poster, our program, plenary speakers, and the abstracts of their presentations, their bios. You can find them here. And here we have the organizing committee, previous events, how to contact and how to register. On the program, when you click on this, you will see 2 days. And today we start with the opening ceremony. And when you click on the links, it will open and you will see a registration link for each session. For example, for the second room, you will stay in the same room, so you don't need to register again and again. If you have registered this main room, and since you are here, it means that you have registered, you can follow all the plenary sessions today. For example, today we have Professor Dr. Hamit Coşkun's talk, and also invited speakers talks. They will be here, and you have already registered. You can join the same link with that one. And for the concurrent sessions, we have also registration links, but I suggest you to use how to register page. And when you have time, you can just register for all rooms and you can join whichever you like. For example, for today, for Friday, you have registered this main room because you are here. I can see that. And for room 1, when you click on this, you will see a registration page, and you are familiar with this page again: first name, last name, email address, and after that you will confirm your email address, and you will receive an email about how to join, and you can just click on that button. It should be in blue color, I think, and you cannot join the session from different devices. So please do not share your link with any other person. So otherwise you cannot join. That person can join the session, but you cannot join. So you will receive specific emails and specific links for the sessions. And for the contact, here you can see that we are planning to use Telegram in online events. Most of the time we have problems about the instant communication. You may have some technical problems, you may have some questions about the program or the speakers, or you may be a speaker and you may have some problems for joining the sessions, or you may have some personal problems for the sessions. You may want to cancel your session. While contacting, you can use Telegram. And when you click on download button, you can see that you can download Telegram for Android, iPhone or iPad, your PC, or for your Mac operating system. And after that, you will click on channel link, and you will see that you can just click on this link and you can join. And when you join this, when you click on this, I will move the buttons here. Here you can see that INGED 2021 here. You can see that these messages will be broadcasted here, and also we have also the INGED chat, and you can ask your questions. For example, this morning I shared the link for how you can register for the main room, and here you can ask your questions as well. And that's all for my part. I can stop sharing. Yes. Now, and thank you again for participating in this conference. Thank you very much. And I hope we can manage all the sessions successfully, and you can leave this event with great ideas. Thank you so much.
As you all know, our first plenary session speaker is Professor Dr. Helen Watt. And because we are going to start a little bit earlier, we may have some time for you guys to ask questions or to make some comments. Sedat Hocam and I will be here, so Helen wouldn't speak to an empty screen, which is very, very demotivating. And we will try to follow your questions. And of course, we will raise those questions when she completes her talk. So welcome to our first plenary session. And our speaker is Professor Dr. Helen Watt. Welcome, my dear colleague. And thank you very much for being with us to share your expertise. I believe the audience will get a lot of information and inspiration from your talk. Helen M.G. Watt is a professor of educational psychology at the University of Sydney and Australian Research Council Future Fellow. Her interests include teacher motivation and development, STEM motivation and participation, and gendered educational and occupational choices. The title of her talk is "What Motivates Teachers and How Does It Matter for Their Professional Pathways of Engagement, Instruction, and Wellbeing?" Welcome again, Professor Dr. Helen Watt. The screen is all yours.
Thank you very much, Aydan, for the very warm welcome, and Sedat for the opening introduction, and to Anil for the invitation to participate in your meeting. Although COVID prevents us meeting in person, the technology is rather wonderful that we can so conveniently exchange. So I'm looking forward to participating over the 2 days. Well, not the parts that are when I'm sleeping, but the other times that I'm able to join in your meeting. So let me share my screen here to show my presentation. Is that fine?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you. So it's very challenging times for teachers and for students. And it is important to know what is motivating and sustaining teachers' engagement, which is very important for themselves, but also will have implications for their students. So although my research was not conducted during COVID, so it's not specifically about impacts of COVID, I think we can still take a lot of messages from it for supporting teachers' engagement, instruction, and wellbeing. So that picture is of me, obviously, on the front side, but I want to also acknowledge my colleague and collaborator in all of this research about teachers, who is Professor Paul Richardson at Monash University in Melbourne, Australia. And our research together is called the Fit Choice Project, where we've been following a large sample of teachers in Australia from when they began their teacher education until now. They've had 15 years teaching experience. So it's a very long-term, longitudinal study. We can learn a lot about how processes unfold. So the overarching questions in our Fit Choice project follow initially 2007 future teachers when they entered their teacher education at 4 different universities in Australia. So we call that phase 1. And then phase 2 was when they were completing their teacher education studies. Phase 3 is in their early career teaching, up to 7 years of teaching experience. And the mentioned phase 4 in their mid-career is up to 15 years of teaching experience. Obviously, a long-term longitudinal study of this length encounters participant attrition. Not all of it is loss from the research project. A substantial amount of it is also actually teachers quitting the profession. But for this presentation, I'm going to take a sort of high-level line through the data and some of the most key findings, rather than getting into all the nuts and bolts details about the sample retention and so on. So the high-level key questions are: what are the expectancy values and goals of beginning teachers, and do they matter? Does it matter what motivated them to choose a teaching career? And what happens to initial motivations after these future teachers become beginning teachers and enter the profession? In their beginning career, how do they cope with demands of the profession, and what does that do to their initial motivations and their well-being? So what are the risks for teachers' effectiveness and well-being? This is a kind of schematic of the different phases of the study, except that I couldn't fit phase 4 on the slide, but it's very like phase 3. So phase 1 at the entry to teacher education is where we use the Fit Choice scale to measure all these different motivations of future teachers and their perceptions about the demands and returns of the teaching profession. At phase 2, which is just prior to them qualifying from teacher education, we focus on their self-efficacies for a very broad, comprehensive set of teachers' work factors, as well as their professional commitment and engagement. Then at phase 3, we have all of that, the motivations, the self-efficacies, the professional commitment, as well as a lot about their school environment and their psychological well-being. And as I mentioned, phase 4 is very like phase 3, but wouldn't fit on the same slide. So the first question, why does anyone choose to teach, which we examine at the very beginning of their teacher education? Why are they there? This is a Fit Choice framework, which is just a bigger version of what you saw on the previous slide. So what you see here is self-perceived abilities, different kinds of values, intrinsic value, enjoyment and interest in teaching, as well as personal values, which are for personal priorities, such as job security, family flexibility, or a transferable job where you can choose where you work and live. We also have different social values, which are about the purpose that teachers can have as teaching professionals, and this negative motivation of a fallback career. This is something that has been in the teacher education literature since at least the 1960s. And it's also rather popular. I don't know about in Turkey, but in Australia, we keep seeing this in newspapers and media about people become teachers because they couldn't do something better. And anyway, as you'll see, it turns out that's not correct. And then these different perceived demands and returns about the teaching profession and antecedent socialization influences. We measure separately social persuasion and social dissuasion, as well as prior teaching and learning experiences or positive role models that the future teachers had encountered. And all of these factors together are proposed to influence the choice of a teaching career. So we didn't just pull these factors out of the air. These are things that had recurred in studies in the teacher education literature. And also we were very informed by the expectancy value theory, which is a theory about why people choose activities that they engage in. So we thought, well, choosing teaching is something that could be usefully informed by such a theory framework. So the expectancy value theory, the Eccles et al. Version of the expectancy value theory was initially developed for the purpose of explaining why students choose advanced mathematics at school. But since then, it's been fruitfully applied to a number of other academic school disciplines, extracurricular activities, and also choices to participate in STEM careers. And we being me and Paul Richardson, thought, why not apply it to examining the choice of choosing teaching as a career? In brief, the expectancy value theory looks at value of the task, perceived demandingness of the task, and perceptions about your own ability as being the main classes of influence for motivating choices. And you can see that all of those dimensions were reflected in our fit choice framework. From the expectancy value theory, intrinsic value and ability perceptions, these are very prominent in the expectancy value theory, but they were not prominent in the teacher education literature, which had examined people's motivations to teach. So by drawing on the underpinning theory, as well as the empirical literature, and putting them together, we think that we end up with a satisfying theory-driven and comprehensive framework. The more distal influences, as you saw in our fit choice diagram, are the socialization and perceptions of previous experience that we captured in the social persuasion, dissuasion, and previous role models. This is how the scale looks. We get them to rate from not at all important up to extremely important on 7-point scales. Different items, there are multiple items for each factor in the fit choice framework. And we then combine the items together that should measure each factor. When people are actually teaching, so this is the one that we used at phase 1, and we say, I chose to become a teacher because. But in early and mid-career, when we ask about their motivations, we change the stem to say, I am a teacher because. So that in the beginning, it's getting at the initial choice, but then once they're teaching, we want to know what their current motivations are for why they're there and why they are still teaching. So here are all those different fit choice factors arranged from the ones that on average were most endorsed down to, as I mentioned, fallback career was not really endorsed, which is satisfying. The media is wrong. And now if I just add some colours, the social values are in green here. In the teacher education literature, these kinds of social values or altruistic values are the ones that were most emphasised as the primary drivers of choosing to teach. But you can see that when we put them into a comprehensive framework, including all these other factors, that in fact the ability motivation and the intrinsic value motivation, which hadn't really been so studied amongst teachers, we got those more from the expectancy value theory, they're just as important as the social values for why they choose to teach. The personal values, which in the teacher education literature had quite often been referred to as unworthy motivations, are less endorsed, including the family flexibility factor, that is another sort of stereotypical reason for people choosing teaching, but actually it's on average below the scale midpoint. So when we look at the longitudinal data in a moment about do motivations matter and how do they matter, something we were very interested to find out is, are these personal values unworthy? Are they detrimental? Maybe it's fine to care about your quality of life and it doesn't have to make you a bad teacher. Okay, so there they all are in order. Now, because of the focus on English teachers at this conference, I thought that I'd better check if the English teachers looked different. And I know that English teachers in Australia means something different from English teachers in countries where the primary language is not English. But even so, I just thought that I would check. And actually, teachers' motivations to teach were mainly similar between secondary and primary future teachers, and also between the different secondary disciplines. So in this graph, you can see the English teachers in orange and maths future teachers in black, and the asterisks show the significant differences, only 2. So the future English teachers were lower on average on this negative fallback career motivation and higher on average on this social equity motivation, but mainly similar. For the perceptions about the profession, the perceived demands and returns at the start of teacher education, phase 1, you can see that on average, they think it's a difficult career. That's really high on the 7-point scale for the average. They think that it's a career requiring high expertise. They had experienced quite moderate dissuasion of people saying, don't become a teacher, you shouldn't become a teacher. The social status they rated just moderately, the salary rather on the low side, and they're probably right here. Yet, despite these high perceived demands and lower, rather low perceived returns, their satisfaction was very high. So they already know that it's going to be demanding and challenging and difficult, but they're highly satisfied with their choice. In a first cross-cultural comparison, we took advantage of an opportunity to collect parallel data in the United States. And together with colleagues at the Max Planck Institute in Berlin, they collected parallel data in Berlin and also in Trondheim, although unfortunately no primary future teachers in Trondheim. Anyway, so this is a very opportune comparison. We wouldn't want to say that we're representing these countries or anything, but we just wanted to check how similar or different motivations and perceptions might look when future teachers come from different contexts. So here they are, Australia, United States, Germany, Norway for each motivation. And I marked the scale midpoint across. And what I'd like you to notice is that the shape looks very similar for each colour. So the things that are most important and least important are quite similar in each setting. I will just highlight 2 things. In Norway, you can see that on all 4 of the social values, they're all future secondary teachers in Trondheim, they were all significantly and substantially lower. What we thought about that is because Norway is a quite egalitarian context, that maybe people would be less inspired to try and help create an egalitarian society when it already is rather egalitarian. So it made sense to us that this would be less of a motivator in such a context. The only factor where there was no significant difference across contexts was this family flexibility. So that seems to be really similar, at least across these 4 settings that we were able to have the opportunity to directly compare. So although there are, little differences here and there, what we conclude from this is that the motivations to teach are really rather similar. In contrast, perceptions about the demands and returns of teaching, all of these bars, everything is significantly different. Every difference here is statistically significant. And this kind of makes sense to us that what you perceive about the profession should depend on what the profession is like, what the salary is like, what the status is like in your context. One really interesting nuance here, if you look at Germany in red, it's got, these future teachers thought teaching was of the lowest status compared to Australia and US, but the highest salary. And they're right, the salary is objectively better for teachers in Germany than in Australia or the US. But this is quite important because in Australia anyway, politicians keep saying that all we need to do to improve the status of the teaching profession is increase the salary. Yet in Germany, we have the important lesson that even higher salary, they're still perceived the lowest status. The time when we collected the data in Germany was 2005, shortly after the 2003 PISA assessment, where the German students achieved less well than politicians hoped. They didn't achieve badly, but less well than had been hoped. And there was a lot of public and media teacher blaming for students not achieving well enough. So we think that had something to do with the depressed social status at that time. Since then, we've worked with colleagues, including probably is Professor Altay Eren known to many of you in this meeting. So he's been one of our collaborators in Turkey and collaborators in a number of other country contexts. And we've worked to really collect these different comparisons in a journal special issue of the Asia Pacific Journal of Teacher Education, a book compilation by Cambridge University Press. I saw that Amanda Yeshelversa is here, who's in that book as well, and also a Routledge publication. So it's interesting to think about what we can learn from these kinds of natural experiments where settings differ in interestingly policy relevant ways, and what we can learn from different contexts about different levers that may support or harm teachers' positive engagement. Okay, so now jumping to when these future teachers become beginning teachers, when the rubber hits the road. So it's not really obvious, and it's not a trivial question, which motivations are going to be most beneficial or which may even make teachers vulnerable. I already mentioned about how those personal values are sometimes called unworthy. Are they? Let's see. And so this is when they've been teaching up to 7 years. And what we find is that, oh dear. Sorry. Beginning teachers, as we saw, rarely chose teaching as a fallback career, which is an important corrective to stereotypes. It was mainly very positive reasons that they chose to teach. With a common measurement platform, natural experiments can yield valuable information, such as we just talked about, adjustments to salary alone are unlikely to alter career satisfaction or retention. And as I will show you in the next slide, initial motivations had impacts up to 7 years teaching on teachers' reported teaching behaviours. So the positive behaviours that we looked at were holding positive expectations for students' behaviour and achievements, for having warm and caring relationships with their students, and for having a well-organised and structured learning environment. The negative behaviours that we looked at were pretty negative, things like deliberate sarcasm, yelling at students, deliberately embarrassing students as ways of trying to keep control and management of the class dynamics. And we find, to spoil the next slide, that the positive motivations were the intrinsic and social values, the ability beliefs, and the having had positive role models. The negative ones, fallback career, that wasn't a surprise to us. Also social persuasion, that was a little bit surprising. I'll say something more about that. And personal values not predictive. So I don't think we need to think about these as unworthy. I think it's perfectly reasonable that future teachers would care about their own lives and important people to them and their families in their lives. So I don't think we have to therefore think that they don't have good teaching motivations. Okay, so here's how the model looked. Phase 1, motivations on the left side. Phase 2, just when they're finishing their teaching qualification in the middle. And phase 3, up to 7 years teaching on the right side. I put in red the negative effects, and the others are not in red. You'll see that personal values isn't here. That's because it didn't have any predictions. Also not here is intrinsic value. Actually, intrinsic value was so highly correlated with ability, social utility, and negatively with fallback motivations that we had to exclude it from the analysis because it caused collinearity and suppression problems in the model. But intrinsic value also was highly related to the phase 2 and the phase 3 factors. So ability motivations at the very entry to teacher education had a direct influence on those positive reported behaviours in early career. Social influences had a direct effect on being more negative on those very negative behaviours in early career. I'll say something more about that in a minute. Fallback career, although it was low endorsed, had the most and harmful effects. So it seems that even small amounts of this motivation are detrimental. The role models, these people had higher leadership aspirations. What else? There's a pathway through planned persistence to positive teaching. So the social altruistic values, those people are more likely to plan to persist. That's a good thing. And to report more positive teaching behaviours. Fallback also has a pathway through here. Less likely to persist, that's probably a good thing. And thereby less likely to have positive teaching behaviours. Positive and negative teaching behaviours obviously are inversely related. Okay, so initial motivations matter even all that time later. So what happens to their initial motivations? Because obviously beginning teachers are embedded in these multiple contexts that have potential to impact them in many ways. And if there's a mismatch between their own motivations and the priorities and opportunities and barriers in the environments where they find themselves, we can end up with a lack of fit or a mismatch, which could create stress and burnout and even attrition. I'll be interested to hear how it is in Turkey, but in Australia, certainly, the higher levels of accountability and auditing and bureaucratic reporting requirements this can really take teachers away from what they consider to be their core business. So it can undermine their intrinsic and social motives, because motivation can become a double-edged sword when you can't achieve your motivations. I just put some of the small quotes from some interviews with our beginning teachers here. And these are rather representative, that they cared a lot about working with the students, helping the students to learn and understand material, preparing them for their future lives and work, and building positive and caring relationships with them. So if they're taken away from this kind of work, that can be a problem. We asked them to rate the extent to which they perceived that they were achieving their main goals in their early career. And you can see that it's only just above the scale midpoint. We then asked them to rate what supported them to achieve their main goals and what were barriers that prevented them to achieve their main goals. And what you can see here is this interesting opposite pattern. What supported them most was themselves, and what prevented them most was their working context. So here, this is very hot off the press, actually. This is a chapter that we just submitted. Here we looked at motivations at phase 1, at the beginning of teacher education, and then in their early career. It says T2, but that's just because we didn't want to confuse the readers, because we are only using these 2 time points. So we thought it would be very confusing if we called it T3. Anyway, so this is the motivations, which are scored between 1 and 7 on average at phase 1 and phase 3. This is just the Pearson correlation to show how stable that they are. And you can see that they're not that stable. The most stable is the role models one. And this color coding, the red ones are ones that significantly decreased by early career. Green is the ones that significantly increased, and black did not significantly change according to repeated measures ANOVAs. So you can see that personal values decreased. We think that's because they discovered that this nice stereotype about teaching being such a flexible career with all this time for your family is actually not really true with the volume of teachers' work. And also one of the social values declined. We think it might be because of all this administration work taking them away from being able to work with youth as much as they would like. Fallback career decrease, that's a good thing. Probably it's because the ones that were high on that are quitting, but for the ones who stay, it decreased. Oh, I should say this is only same people. So we're not comparing, we're not mixing up people who quit in the first column. So it's just the same people over time. So intrinsic value and 2 of the social values increased, probably a good thing. And satisfaction decreased, not a good thing. So what is it in their school context that might help us understand motivations changing? Here we correlated for the things that changed, different aspects that they reported about their early career school environment that we organised according to the self-determination theory, autonomy, competence and relatedness. So you can see that career choice satisfaction is very responsive. Red is all the significant associations. Career choice satisfaction is very responsive. Changes in it relate to all of these factors in their beginning school environment. And the kind of the factors that have most relationship with changes are leadership support. So there's only one thing that's not red there, and sense of belonging. So it seems that these might be the biggest, broadest levers if we wanted to be promoting sustaining teachers' initially positive motivations. Not all teachers are the same, obviously. We looked for different types of beginning teachers in terms of their professional engagement at the very outset of their teaching career. So this is phase 2, right when they're finishing their teaching qualification. We had them rate about how effortful they plan to be, extent of participation in professional development when they start teaching, planned persistence in the profession, and leadership aspirations, which were each scored by multiple items and rated on 7-point scales. Using Ward's hierarchical cluster analysis, we ended up with these 3 clusters. So the red one, which is high on everything, the pale blue one, which is lower on everything, and this mixed type that's the same as the red type, except lower on planned persistence. These circles show where things are not significantly different. So the first 2 are really the same, except on planned persistence. Okay, so we called these the highly engaged persisters, which was 45% of them, the highly engaged switchers, about a quarter of them, and the lower engaged desisters, about a quarter of them. We didn't call them low engaged because they're really actually quite high on their planned effort and planned professional development, but they are lower than the other types. This highly engaged switchers type is especially interesting. After they rate these questions, we also ask them if they're planning not to stay in teaching. We get them to say how long they think until they leave, what they want to do next, and why. And this highly engaged switchers type was very interesting. Their time frame was about 5 years, and their open-ended questions, we made a kind of taxonomy from their responses, which were groups such as the challenge seekers, the restless spirits, who were worried about, they would get bored if they just did the one thing for their whole career. There were the stepping stoners. These were people who already had a plan that they wanted to be something else, like a business trainer or a sports coach, and they thought that a teaching qualification would be beneficial for them to get to their actual goal. So there were all these different reasons, which actually were all quite positive reasons. And as you can see, they plan to be just as effortful and undertake professional learning and aspire to leadership aspirations as the highly engaged persister group. So until this, people had kind of assumed that early career teacher attrition is because once the teachers commence in the profession, they get this negative reality shock and think, oh, how horrible, this is not for me. But for this 1/4 of the sample group, that's not the case. They already planned this before they began in the profession, and for quite positive reasons. So that puts a new perspective on early career teacher attrition, not always for negative reasons. The lower engaged assisters, however, the open-ended reasons they gave were quite negative. So it was about the negative experience they had in schools during their teaching qualification, and they would say things like, I didn't realise that I would have no personal space, just a 1-metre desk. So they had kind of negative reasons. So who's in these types? In the highly engaged persisters, they tended to be older, of the lowest socioeconomic status background, a reasonably high proportion of non-English speaking background. About 1/3 of them had children, and they had chosen teaching the longest ago. So it had been an early plan for them. And this group was highest on the positive motivations of intrinsic value, teaching abilities, and social values. And they were the lowest on the fallback motivation. So this looks like a really desirable profile. The middle group, the highly engaged switchers, they were the youngest, of the highest socioeconomic background, had low proportion of non-English speakers. Not many had children, probably because they're also the youngest. And they were kind of in between both other types on intrinsic and social values. The lower engaged assisters were older, like the first group, lowish non-English speaking background, again, a third with children. And this group had the highest prior qualifications and high status previous careers and chose to teach the most recently. So for a lot of these people, it was a switch in, whereas the second group were planning a switch out from teaching. The lower engaged assisters were more motivated by this negative fallback motivation, and the least motivated by these positive, as we saw, beneficial, intrinsic and social values. So that's all very interesting. We've got different types that have different motivational profiles. How does this forecast their development when they start teaching? So here's the highly engaged persisters and their motivations at phase 1, beginning of teacher education, and phase 3, up to 7 years teaching experience. There are no statistically significant differences there. So their motivations remain really similar for this group. So even though we saw before at the whole sample level, quite a lot of instability in motivations, for this type, they're very stable. They hold on to their initially very positive motivations. The highly engaged switchers make a couple of downward motivational adjustments. So job security and making a social contribution become less important to why they are teaching by their early career. The lower engaged assisters make a couple of upward motivational adjustments. I suppose something would have to go up because they weren't really planning to stay. So something would have to go up to keep them there. Okay. We also had, I mentioned at the start, we have this very comprehensive self-efficacy scale, the SET self-efficacy for teaching scale, which asks about all these different factors in teachers' work, how confident from 1, not at all confident, up to 7, extremely confident, that the beginning teachers feel. So they answer this not at the start of teacher education, because we thought, what's the point of asking that before they have their teacher studies? But at phase 2, at the very end of their teacher studies, we ask them about their confidence on all these factors. And at phase 3 in their early career, we ask them again. Now, across this large number of factors, for that many, for more than half of them, the highly engaged persisters take a drop. They feel less confident in so many facets of teachers' work. In contrast, the highly engaged switchers and the lower engaged assisters, no significant changes at all. So it might be that the highly engaged persisters that looked like such a desirable profile, such positive motivations, the fact that they hold on to those very positive ideals in their early career might make them more psychologically vulnerable to feeling that they're not efficacious and they're not achieving their goals if they hold on to them, even in the face of adversity and difficulties. Whereas the motivational adjustments that the other 2 clusters made might help them be more resilient by letting go of things if they're unable to achieve, perhaps. We also compared their satisfaction with their career choice, which we asked at all 3 phases. And you can see a similar story here. The highly engaged persisters is the only group that shows a significant decline, whereas the other 2 clusters don't change over time and are similar to each other. The highly engaged persisters, when they decline to the same level to be similar with other clusters. Their planned persistence, we asked at phase 2 and phase 3, and it's the same story. So our interpretation about what to do here would not be, well, let's try and reduce those positive motivations for the highly engaged persisters, because that should mean that they won't be vulnerable to feeling less satisfied, planning to persist less, and not feeling efficacious in their early career. That would not be our recommendation at all. Our recommendation would be, how can beginning school contexts support beginning teachers better for this group to attain their very positive goals and motivations? Okay. So now moving to the newest career data. So I want to acknowledge two postdoctoral scholars who worked with me and Paul Richardson, Christelle Devos and Mikhail de Klerk, in this work, where we look at coping from early to mid-career and the consequences for teachers' engagement and personal well-being. So German researchers, not looking specifically at teachers, but looking at workers across a very large range of professions, developed this taxonomy of different kinds of, they call them health types, which can be considered along two dimensions of psychological well-being and professional commitment. So there's a good health type, which is high on both, a burnout type that's poor on both, sparing, their well-being is fine, but they're not making any efforts, and ambitious. In their studies, they found a group they call excessive ambitious, and this group had very high commitment, very high efforts, and low well-being. So we wondered, would we find same types amongst beginning teachers? Would there be the same types then by mid-career or different types? And how might people move from one type to another? And how might movement depend on their school context? We also wondered, in the teacher education literature, there's been discussion about a worn-out type. And how this is talked about is that the burnout type, so they both have poor well-being, is the idea, but the burnout type are still really struggling and trying, and the worn-out type gave up. So we wondered if we might be able to split types here. We know lots of studies linking teacher burnout to turnover and reduced commitment, poor coping and well-being, and reduced work satisfaction. And we talked before about the double-edged sword idea. Teachers who maintain high motivations when they can't attain them are more likely to burn out. Whereas the worn out, says Stevenson, reduce their efforts to cope. So they're no longer trying to perform well. And Stevenson estimated that maybe 3 times as many teachers are worn out than burned out. We wanted to see if we could really empirically identify these types. So the worn out type are supposed to have reduced goals, less responsibility that they feel, less idealism, emotional detachment, alienation from work, and becoming interested in their own survival, really. So we did actually identify these types. I've put down the bottom here examples of the items, so the 4 factors that we did a latent profile analysis with. So we called the first factor subjective well-being and coping, the next exertion, the next ambition. These are from the German researchers' scale, but we added an emotional exhaustion scale, because if we really wanted to dig into the burnout and worn out, then we wanted to make sure that we didn't just have a well-being factor, we wanted to have an ill-being factor as well. So there's example questions. And you can see that the worn out and the burnout indeed are the high exhaustion ones. and the burnout are high on exertion, whereas the worn out are low on exertion and ambition, and they're both very low on well-being as well. So we can distinguish the burnout and the worn out, how we anticipated and hoped. Then we have, which is this one, I've got something over the bottom of it, of the sparing. Yes, their effort and ambition is very low, just how sparing should be. The ambitious, it doesn't look like that they're an excessive ambitious, like the German researchers found amongst diverse workers, because their exhaustion isn't really elevated. It's nothing like the burnout and the worn out. So their exertion and ambition is high, but their subjective well-being and coping is also high. So we just called them ambitious, not excessive ambitious. And we find this more balanced good health type, which have the lowest exhaustion and moderate exertion and ambition and positive well-being and coping. So there's the types. And we found same types at early and mid-career. And this is the numbers and percentages of same teachers at early and mid-career. So only people who were there both times. And in these terrible risk types, you can see that we've got about 1/3 of the sample, which is not good, even at early career, even right when they're starting. So you can see that the proportion of worn out looks really the same. Burnout, it looks like maybe it went down a little bit. Good health, it went up, more people became good health. But from this, we don't know, is it the same 20% of people who stay worn out? Or do people move in and out between the types dependent on their school context? And if so, this might help us to identify levers to help move people into more positive profiles. So we did a latent profile transition analysis to look at these latent transitions between types from early to mid-career. Down the main diagonal, you can see the stabilities. So 72% of teachers who were initially worn out, stayed worn out. The most stable type is the good health. 84% of them stay good health. So it seems like if you start out that way, that you stay that way. So it's important how you start out. The least stable is burnout. Half of them who were initially burnout stay burnout. And it does seem like a rather unsustainable state. So maybe that's not surprising. Okay, so aside from the stability, in the off diagonals, I've underlined where there's a noticeable proportion who move. So I underlined ones where there's more than 10% of movement. So initially burned out teachers, 20% of them go to worn out, which is not good. So they still have exhaustion, but they gave up on their efforts. But 22% of them go to ambitious. So they keep their efforts, but somehow manage their emotional exhaustion. So that's a really positive transition. On the quitting thing, though, 3 times as many initially burned out teachers had quit by mid-career, and double as many worn out teachers had quit by mid-career than among the other types. So a bunch of the burnout and worn out are also quitting. Okay. Initially ambitious, 1/3 of them moved to good health by mid-career. That's fine. Ambitious and good health are both positive types. And conversely, 11% of the initially good health go to ambitious. 29% of the initially sparing go to good health. Well, that's good, because even though their well-being was fine in early career, they're really not the kind of people that you want to have to employ or work with if they're not taking their share of effort and work. And 14% of them become worn out, which means that they keep their low effort but they lose their well-being. And what else? Initially worn out, 13% of them become sparing. Well, I suppose that's an improvement. So they keep their low effort, but their well-being improves. All right. How can aspects of their early career environment influence those different transitions that we see occurred? We looked at two possible levers here, one excessive demands and the other leadership support. For excessive demands, so they rate questions such as teachers are overloaded with work in this school, and they rate from strongly disagree to strongly agree for a number of items for each factor. So excessive demands impeded the transition from sparing to good health. It also increased the probability for worn out to stay worn out and for burnout to stay burnout instead of recovering to positive types. Leadership support, this very important transition from burnout to good health. Oh, and that was all. Anyway, those are important levers. Excessive demands is a very harmful lever, and leadership support is important. All right, and it really mattered, the consequences of which type that they were in really mattered for their personal wellbeing and professional engagement. So here in the brownie colour is teaching stress, and in green is professional engagement for the different types. And you can see that burnout has the highest teaching stress, whereas sparing and good health have the lowest. Worn out has the highest professional engagement. No, it doesn't. Worn out has the lowest professional engagement, and ambitious and good health have the highest professional engagement. For their personal well-being, worn out and burnout have the highest depression, whereas sparing and good health have the lowest. Burnout has the highest anxiety, sparing has the lowest. Worn out and burnout have the highest stress, sparing has the lowest. I still don't think we want sparing. So to sum up, teaching motivations can be measured and appear similarly across the examined contexts, which include countries, school level, and school subjects taught. Teachers are primarily motivated by intrinsic and social values and own teaching abilities, not by negative fallback motivations. Motivations matter for teaching behaviours and professional engagement, even up to 7 years teaching. Different teacher engagement types exhibit different initial motivations and show different adjustment to their teaching contexts. Highly engaged persisters maintain idealistic goals, seemingly at the expense of their self-efficacy, satisfaction, and planned persistence. Different coping profiles appear, even among beginning teachers. Good health and sparing, but I'm not sure that we want to be encouraging sparing. They cope the best. Burnout and worn out cope the least. Coping types can recover with leadership support during early career, but excessive demands are highly detrimental. In terms of practical and policy implications, I think that the big story from all of this is that beginning teachers have very positive goals and motivations, and we need to assist them to achieve them and help equip them with effective strategies to cope when starting teaching. Future school psychologists and counsellors learn a lot about self-care and personal adaptive coping, but we don't teach this to future teachers, at least not in Australia. And if we don't attend to this, then teachers' effectiveness and well-being will be compromised, and this will have implications for students' engagement and learning. And I just would like to finish by acknowledging the very many research assistants and postdocs who have worked together with us on the Fit Choice research over 20 years now, 20 years since we had the first phase 1 assessment. So it's been a long time. I've really, I really look older. Okay, well, that was the end of the presentation. So I'd really welcome exchange and questions.
Well, what a great way to start our conference. Thank you very much, Dr. Watt. I think the myths, like teachers have a lot of free time, they have lengthy holidays, I think they are universal. I wish they were true, but they're not, especially for devoted teachers. Anyways, but I have noticed some overlapping areas and some which may have different results depending on the context here in Turkey. But it was really very, very informative. Thank you. Yes, Sedat Hocam, if there are any questions, could you please take over and raise them?
Okay. First of all, Aydan Hocam, can you see the question and answers session?
Yes, I can.
Can you read the questions? We have some questions. If
Okay.
since you are the moderator, you can
Okay.
ask the question.
Okay. Okay. Okay. I like hearing my voice like any other teacher. So the first one is from Pınar Kahveci. Thank you for the amazing talk. I would like to ask a question about the cross-cultural differences in teacher motivations. All settings mentioned are wealthy countries, the US, Germany, Norway, Australia, with Western values, and you have mentioned that the motivations are quite similar in these settings. How do you think these motivations differ in low-income countries with more Orientalist values?
Yes, thank you. It's an excellent question. That comparison that I presented, as I mentioned, was very opportune. It was just that, we had those contexts available to compare. So they weren't really the best contexts to compare. It's just what we had. But since then, researchers have been using the Fit Choice Scale across a lot of different settings. Mm-hmm. And so we have found that in more collective cultures, such as China and Turkey, that those social values are really the most important ones, and the intrinsic and ability ones become more moderate. So it seems, and that kind of makes sense, doesn't it? That your individual interest and your individual ability is less important than how you can contribute to the social good. So it does seem as if in, sensible ways, depending on the ideology and the context. Mm-hmm. I think it's, important to keep looking at more different contexts to have these kind of natural experiments, so we can see how things might play out. Yeah.
Well, it's a good idea. Maybe one of the young academics here can carry out or start carrying out such a study, because it's going to take a long time, as Dr. Watt has mentioned. So
if you do the whole longitudinal thing, yes.
Yeah. The next question is from Seher Tanboğa. As I understand from your explanations, the reasons beyond highly engaged switches' fluctuated motivations mostly come out from individual career choice and economic factors. I apologize if I have missed it, but have you had an opportunity to study the relationship between the educational background and self-reported teaching skills of this group? I wonder if there might be a causal relationship between their teaching competencies and decreased motivation.
Thank you for the excellent suggestion, actually. We haven't looked at that, but we could, and it's an extremely good idea. Thank you. Yes, that interesting kind of mixed profile were the most advantaged. So they were the group that I think, really have options and choices. It's a really good idea. Thank you.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. The next one is from Ferhat Karanfil. Are there any scales like Maslach burnout inventory to scrutinize wornout?
No. Yeah, so no.
Yeah.
But we were conceptualizing it as, this profile. So we thought that according to the definition by Stevenson, not only should they be exhausted, but they should also have given up their efforts.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it requires measures on both factors to find them.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, Zeynep Ölçü Dinçer says another issue for career persistence in Turkey is university prestige. This can be true for other contexts. Specifically, research shows that graduates of highly prestigious universities are less persistent than the less prestigious ones. Do you agree with this statement?
We don't have data to address it, but
Okay.
very good suggestion. I wonder if actually that's kind of operating as a proxy for socioeconomic advantage. I wonder if they're the people who are more likely to attend those prestigious universities.
Well, I don't know the research, honestly. So it sounds like these people are spoiled. That's it, I guess.
It could
Sorry
be.
for this unacademic way of criticizing people. I mean, if you attend a highly prestigious university, that means you are embellished with all the necessary skills to be committed to the profession. So why less persistence? Well, whatever.
Well,
So
maybe-
that's my personal opinion.
Maybe it comes back to, they've got more options and advantages.
Yeah,
and
maybe.
And so if they encounter something unpleasant, they just take another opportunity, perhaps.
Yeah.
We don't have huge variation in the prestige of the universities in Australia. So it would be quite interesting, in a context where there is large variation, to look at those kinds of questions.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's maybe you need to be very careful when you come out with these terms, because if you consider a university as a less prestigious university, then your research may start with a biased attitude. I don't know. So if you want to carry out some study like this, please pay attention and make sure that the university also classifies itself as less prestigious. Just a quick warning. İlknur Ülker Mermer says, what could you suggest these early career teachers to preserve their well-being during their career? I guess that's the top, that's another session, right? Dr. Watt, what do you say? Can you answer it briefly?
Yeah, maybe just something briefly. So one important factor is this sense of responsibility and what teachers feel responsible for, because some of the things that teachers who burn out feel responsible for are things really beyond their control. So it's important to distinguish between what you can and can't do something about. So that's very important. And not to take on things that actually you're not equipped to. So, not trying to act like a counsellor for students when you don't actually have that expertise. So knowing about other supports that you can refer onto. So I think a lot of it is to do with boundaries, boundaries between professional and personal life. Not giving out your home phone number, not checking your emails late at night. I should take my own advice.
Yeah. I have two more questions and hopefully we can finish them on time. Tamari Dolitze says, I have a question. What was the best remedy on your personal experience for keeping work-life balance during COVID-19?
Probably, I live alone, so there was always the possibility that I only work through COVID when we had all our lockdowns and we couldn't, go more than 5 kilometres and only to buy food.
Yeah.
So I suppose for me it was keeping in contact with loved ones through telephone calls and the relational thing. Oh, that has some resonance with the importance of the sense of belonging. in sustaining teachers' positive motivations, I think. So I think relational connections.
Yeah. Well, actually, if you can keep yourself happy, my personal opinion, if you can keep yourself happy as a person, you will also be a happy teacher. It is vital for your mental health. So I think you're the only person who can find different ways of keeping yourself happy. I'm not going to come up with any suggestions. Of course, this is Dr. Watt's session, but please reflect on yourself and find something that makes you happy, and you will be a happy teacher. And the last one, in fact, is from Amanda Yeşilbursa. It's not, in fact, a question, but a kind of an answer to the previous one. Regarding the prestige universities, maybe they focus less on teaching in state schools and focus more on academia. Maybe. So their graduates may be less ready for the state school environment. Maybe, Amanda Hocam, I'm not so sure about that, but that's a very nice point. Thank you very much for your contribution. That's the questions that we have. Dr. Watt, I really appreciate this inspiring talk. Thank you very much. Hope to see you around. I hope you stay connected. I know, I think it's getting late now there. Is it like the evening?
It's not too late. It's 6:30 p.m.
Okay, great, great. Thank you very much. My dear colleagues, this is the end of our first plenary session. Please leave the room and go to the concurrent session room right now. Your hosts will be waiting for you there. Thank you. Take very good care of yourselves. Bye-bye.